You reckon I should just sit by? Watch this illegal alien swan on end?
No.
I don't think so. That'd be quite un-Australian.
This is my station. Around here, you need a ticket.
What are you?
You want to ride the train? Ticket, ticket. Who got the ticket? All aboard! Woo woo!
It's kind of sad to watch these clips now. Sure, they're very well done, but that's the thing. As great as they are, what they're made for will never see the light of day. If you're watching this, then there's a very good chance that means you're interested in lost media, but more specifically, animated films that just ended up getting canceled. Just as much as finished movies can, animated features that never came to be are able to spark the imagination regarding what would have happened if they did make that film, only relying on concept arts and unused animations posted on the internet as clues to putting the pieces together. What many forget is that projects that get cancelled are actually more common than films that ended up getting produced. It's just that there's only a fraction of them that their existence get published in the public. In fact, every animation studio has at least that one scrap project that is almost as known as the films they've made. Pixar has Newt, Fox has Mouse Guard, Sony has Popeye, Studio Ghibli has that Porco Rosso sequel, and I could talk all day about the rejected movies by Disney. That's an entire subject worth discussing in itself. But then there's DreamWorks Animation. They also have their share of canceled projects, but theirs seems to stand out more than the rest. In fact, all those clips you saw at the beginning came from a scrap DreamWorks film. One of their lost projects, however, is not only regarded as their most popular, but it's often considered to possibly be the most famous canceled animated film today. A project that is known by many as Me and My Shadow. Even though this movie doesn't exist, it has still managed to gather a large cult following, and people to this day are still demanding DreamWorks to revive the project. But why this one? Out of all their canceled projects, why are people so interested in this one in particular? Well, not only am I gonna get into the history of this film and find out how it got canceled, but I'm also gonna talk about why this is DreamWorks' most famous lost film. So, what happened to Me and My Shadow? Well, let's find out. Our story begins back in late 2010 when DreamWorks Animation announced a new animated feature they're developing called Me and My Shadow. At the beginning, the company already set up the core elements, including what this movie would be about, the people to work on it, and even gave it a release date of March 2013. The idea of this movie would be a buddy comedy about a shadow named Stan, who wanted to spice up the life of a boring human he's attached to by breaking the shadow rules and controlling him. The crew making this involves Teresa Chang and Melissa Cobb as producers, writers that include Steve Benkich and Ron Friedman, with revisions by Tom Astle and Matt Ember, and hire Mark Dindal to take the helm. You might know Mark more as the director of films like Cats Don't Dance, The Emperor's New Groove, and Chicken Little. But the true selling point of this movie was never who was making it, the plot, or whatever actors they would get as the voices. It was all about the unique hybrid animation. Now, when I say hybrid animation, I don't mean the usual live-action film with animated characters running around. What DreamWorks meant as hybrid animation was that the real world in the movie would be all computer animated, like they usually do, and all the shadows, which was the central theme here, would be all animated in hand-drawn. This would make it the first time that DreamWorks prominently returned to hand-drawn animation after abandoning it due to the colossal failure of Sinbad: Legend of the Seven Seas. Fast forwarding a little over a year later in early 2012, not only did a bit more info about Me and My Shadow came out, but DreamWorks also found their leading voices. Here's what the new synopsis says about the movie. Me and My Shadow centers on Stan, a shadow who yearns for a more exciting life than being attached to a timid human named Stanley Grubb. When a crime in the shadow community puts both their lives in danger, Stan is forced to take control of Stanley, thrusting both of them into an adventure featuring a shadowy villain who intends to lead a rebellion to take over the human world. For the actors involved with this project, there's Kate Hudson, who would play Stanley's love interest, who's into photography, Josh Gad as the dull and shy Stanley Grubb, and Bill Bill Hader as the energetic, shape-shifting Shadow Stan. On a side note, when checking out the test footage, the best way to describe Stan is, what if Bill Hader took on the role of the genie from Disney's Aladdin?
Hey, a bank robbery! Come on, let's go! Come on, don't you want to be a hero? Well, I don't know where you're from, but here in America, we tried to get on the TV. Let's do it!
However, even if they did got actors on the mic to record their lines, there were two things that came with the announcement that showed the first sign of problems with the production. Mark Dindal was replaced by DreamWorks veteran Alessandro Carloni as the director, and the release date was pushed back several months to November of 2013. But then things got even more complicated when Mr. Peabody and Sherman came into the scene. This was a project that DreamWorks and director Rob Minkoff had in development for several years to turn the classic Jay Ward cartoons into an animated feature, and it wasn't until the early 2010s that the project finally found some traction, which was around the same time as they were making Me and My Shadow. It was obvious how the company had confidence on Peabody more so than Shadow, which was why a few months after announcing the cast, Peabody and Shadow switched release date, where the former would be released earlier on November 8th, 2013, and the latter would be out later on March 14th, 2014, a whole year after its original scheduled release, on top of acknowledging that it needed more time to finish. On February of 2013, another schedule switch occurred with Peabody and Shadow, but this time, the outcome would set the writing on the wall. DreamWorks decided to switch back the release of Peabody to March 7th, 2014, stating that it would have a much better chance of success if it were released later during the spring. As for Me and My Shadow, they just pulled it out of its release date and never gave it a new one since, stating that it was put back onto development. Unfortunately, that was the last time there were any updates on the movie. While it hasn't been directly reported, what is most likely the final nail in the coffin was on January of 2015. In an effort to restructure the entire company, DreamWorks decided to completely downsize by shutting down the PDI studio in Redwood City and lay off around 500 employees. This was due to the financial losses really hitting them hard when two of their films from the previous year ended up as a box office bomb, losing $57 million each, including Penguins of Madagascar and, ironically, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. So with the loss of one of their studios and literally hundreds of employees, it would be no surprise that Me and My Shadow was taken down along with them. It wasn't the only project that got scrapped at the time though. Another DreamWorks film called Boo, Bureau of Otherworldly Operations was well into development before it got cancelled due to the whole restructuring. The film's director, Tony Leondis, quickly picked himself back up later to move to Sony Pictures Animation in order to write and direct the Emoji Movie. In the long run, he might have had it worse than DreamWorks. Of course, 2015 was a real tough start for DreamWorks, but it was the year that they focused more on making changes in management and rehabilitating itself, and less on developing as many animated features as they can. In fact, this was the time they decided to cut down on the amount of films they released annually, from 2 or even 3 a year to 1 or at the most 2. And so, Me and My Shadow ended up being just that to DreamWorks, a shadow of a project that never came to be. And yet that didn't seem to stop them from trying to make an animated Shadow movie. Enter acclaimed filmmaker Edgar Wright, the man known for making the Cornetto trilogy that includes Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End. On November of 2015, DreamWorks hired him to write with David Walliams and make his animated directorial debut with a new Shadow-themed movie. The company even stated that this would update the original concept of Me and My Shadow and give it a new twist thanks to Wright's signature comedic style and storytelling. However, as it turns out years later, the project ended up being dropped again because DreamWorks had to do some restructuring. Again. On April 28, 2016, Comcast officially purchased the entirety of DreamWorks Animation for $3.8 billion. This means that there was another management change-up in order to have NBC Universal fit in with the company. including having DreamWorks Animation's founder Jeffrey Katzenberg to step down as the leader. This pretty much left Wright's shadow project in the back burner, as it didn't fully line up with NBC Universal's new vision for DreamWorks. In an interview with Collider in 2017, when asked about his shadow film, Edgar said, "Well, I wrote 3 drafts on that, but because of the whole regime change there, most of the people that hired me and David Walliams to do it don't work there anymore. So at the moment, that's not something I'm necessarily attached to, I think. It's something that's to be determined." And here we are today, many years after it was first announced, and it looks like DreamWorks has no interest in making a shadow movie whatsoever. All we're left with is just a bunch of concept art and some animation tests, mostly featuring Stan, that the animators uploaded online. When looking through the movie's history, it's pretty clear as to why it never came to be. While there are certain clues that could indicate that the production did not go as smoothly as they planned, the real reason is unfortunately because of really bad timing. The production occurred at the same time as when DreamWorks was at its worst shape. Frequent flops were hitting them harder one after another, and during the middle of the decade, they could no longer support themselves the same way they used to and had to make some sacrifices. It had gotten so bad that the company could no longer run by themselves and had to survive by being bought out by a giant company like Comcast. And throughout the whole process, the leadership position saw a constant shift that was always changing the direction of where DreamWorks Animation was heading in order to stay strong as an animation studio. To put it simply, the DreamWorks Animation of when Me and My Shadow began was an entirely different studio than the DreamWorks Animation that we have now, or even completely different just a few years after. And as the studio changed, the movie ended up not being a good fit for their business. But it does leave us with one big question. Despite the fact that it never got made, why is it that so many people seem to be more fascinated with this than they are with most other DreamWorks films that actually did get made? Well, funny enough, it turns out that its main selling point really got fans hooked. While innovating the use of animation to create new ways of storytelling is always appealing, this unique technique made people believe that this could possibly lead to something they've always wanted: the comeback of mainstream hand-drawn animation. It's no secret that the cartoon community badly wants the major studios to make 2D animated features again. While I'm sure we all would love to see hand-drawn return to the big screen and get as much exposure as CGI, I know I do, but with the cartoon fans, they are desperate for hand-drawn. And when I say desperate, I mean,
I'll do anything! I'll suck your dick!
Ever since companies like Disney and DreamWorks decided to let go of hand-drawn in favor of computer animation, and companies like Pixar and Blue Sky were on the rise in the early 2000s, fans have always demanded and pleaded for studios to not give up on making 2D animated films. Heck, there's even a whole documentary on how hand-drawn is doing nowadays, literally called Hand-Drawn. There was a short instance when Disney almost brought the medium back with The Princess and the Frog and the 2011 Winnie the Pooh movie, but because they flopped at the box office, they quickly abandoned it and went back to producing 3D films. Yes, I am aware that technically hand-drawn animated features never went away, since there are plenty of great independent features that use the medium that are still released to this day, but that's not what the cartoon community wants. They don't really care about indie films. They just want their hand-drawn works to be specifically from the big studios and to have them released worldwide so that they can easily go check it out at their local theater. Yeah, they could be very picky with their cartoons. I know it sounds weird talking about this on Me and My Shadow because it wasn't a fully hand-drawn film. DreamWorks did state that it was supposed to be a half 2D, half CGI movie. But again, fans are desperate for hand-drawn. They'll take what they can get. Even if it meant to prominently put some hand-drawn on a computer animated feature, at least that is something. Plus the fact that DreamWorks did start off with some strong 2D animated films that are still highly beloved to this day, like The Prince of Egypt, The Road to El Dorado, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas, and Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. Their time with hand-drawn was unfortunately very short, since they didn't make much money. But they did leave quite an impact. And considering how some of their films failed to hit the mark, when fans ask DreamWorks to bring back hand-drawn, it's like they're asking for less of this and more of this. Technically, there was one instance in 2018 that they did release a 2D animated short called Bird Karma, but that's just a short. Again, Fans are picky and want a movie. But to be fair, the intrigue of Me and My Shadow is not just that it had hand-drawn. It's more that it used hand-drawn in a unique and creative way. Of course, this is not the first time seeing cartoon characters play around with their shadow. It's been done plenty of times before in animated movies like Peter Pan and The Princess and the Frog with Dr. Facilier. However, most of those movies are from animated films that are entirely or mostly 2D. In this film, like I said before, the real world would be all computer animated, while all the shadows and the shadow world would have been hand-drawn. The blend of both would kick in when the 2D shadow characters move around in the 3D environments and play a lot with the lighting. And that is what makes this movie's concept stand out. The blend of 2D and 3D animation to create a new medium of storytelling. But while the movie never came to be, that doesn't mean this experimentation was never done. And yes, this even includes some of the big studios. More than others though, it's Disney who prominently displayed the most projects to mix hand-drawn with computer in recent years, especially with some of their shorts. They used computer animation to emulate hand-drawn with Paper Man, they showed characters jumping between mediums with Get a Horse, and they displayed computer animation onto hand-drawn characters with Pixar's Day and Night, which is like the complete opposite of what the canceled movie tried to do. And let's not forget Mary Poppins Returns that mixed everything with hand-drawn characters interacting with live actors in a CGI background. The closest that was ever done to accomplishing what Me and My Shadow tried to make visually was in the 2016 film Moana. The character Minnie Maui is the living tattoo that lives on the body of Maui. The concept is the exact same as Me and My Shadow, where Minnie Maui is a 2D flat character that runs around the 3D body of Maui, on top of having both Minnie and Stan represented with just one color and open spaces. Sure, Minnie Maui isn't as prominently shown in the movie as much as Stan would have been in his, but hey, at least the idea was actually put to use. Overall, while the movie never got made, Me and My Shadow ended up becoming not just one of the most talked about canceled projects by DreamWorks Animation, but also one of the most famous lost animated films. It had an experimental concept that got many people on board with the idea. The saddest thing about the project is that its downfall is not entirely its own fault. There may have been some issues behind the scenes, but what ultimately doomed the project was just being made at the worst time possible. As they were trying to sort out the issues of the movie, DreamWorks Animation had to abandon it in order to sort out some of the bigger problems within the company, resulting in several leadership changes and a complete buyout in a span of just a few years. And by the time things settled down again, DreamWorks became an entirely different company than what it was before and lost all interest in pursuing a Shadow movie. But even if it never got made, it still managed to spark the imagination of fans of what could have been. To them, it wasn't about the story or the world of shadows or even the dynamic of Josh Gad and Bill Hader. It was about the unique animation and how it might have given just a little bit of what fans always wanted. The movie was viewed as a promise for the small return of hand-drawn animation in the mainstream, and as an added bonus, it would have been used in a cleverly innovative way. Who knows what would have happened if it did get made? And who knows if it would have been successful or not. But one thing it can be right now is an inspiration. If the big studios will ever get back into making fully hand-drawn animated features again, they'll most likely have to start slowly transitioning to it, and the first step would be to make a computer animated film and find a way to sneak in some hand-drawn into the mix. The project is now nothing but a shadow. But that doesn't mean it can't make an impact on people as much as a finished film. This was all his idea, by the way. Yeah, and with all the requests you have done, it's about time that you do one for someone who is always close to you.
Come on, don't you want to be a hero?